guys for having me today to participate in this very, very important conversation and around a lot of the things that are happening in this COVID world that we live in. As you can imagine, clinical trials and decentralized clinical trials and virtual visits is a hot topic. It's been a topic for quite a while, but it has absolutely escalated over, say, the last year, and then doubled or tripled in volume of chatter over the last 6 or 7 months. And I'm going to kind of talk to that today, a little bit about the impact of COVID in the space. But really, the three things I want to focus on in today's conversation is, number one, I want to kind of start from the beginning, kind of educate on what a virtual visit is and how it works. Maybe talk you through how to consider whether decentralized or virtual visits is a good option for your study, and then ultimately share some best practices and insights that we've learned through our experience. And just kind of to put this on the radar, at Thread, our whole operation is around providing a software as a service and a tech platform to provide virtual visits in between, during, and in lieu of in-clinic visits through our platform. We also offer a suite of services around that, and we've done this quite a bit. And the reason that I'm bringing this to the table is I really want to set the stage that I'm bringing insights of actually having performed virtual visits and decentralized studies globally, and we've done over 120 projects here. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some of those bearings, some of those learnings to bear here, and hopefully that will help guide you as you're thinking about making decisions on whether decentralized and virtual visits is something that is interesting for you. So just to kind of level set and kind of align on some of the vernacular, we use the words decentralized clinical trials. That is what has been given out as kind of guidance from the agency. And the most popular approach is what we call our hybrid decentralized study approach. And what this does is this replaces some in-clinic visits. And so if you look at the graphic here, the yellow boxes, they represent a in-clinic visit, and the blue boxes represent a virtual visit. And all the kind of icons in between are data collection mechanisms that are in between those different visits. And they can happen in between the visits, they can happen during those visits, but using a digital mechanism to be able to collect that data is ultimately what is part of a decentralized study. Now, there's obviously a spectrum of decentralized. And I'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. There's on the far left is the, let's have all in-clinic visits, but let's just collect some data in between those visits. And on the far right of that spectrum, you've got all virtual visits. There's no in-clinic visits. It's all done through a central site. And the ones with the fully decentralized studies are happening more and more, and they're gaining more and more popularity. As you can imagine, it has quite a few benefits that sponsors, sites, and participants can all really appreciate. And I'll talk about that a little bit later today as well. But really, just to kind of make sure that we're understanding the terminology, this hybrid decentralized study is really about finding the right visits and converting them to virtual to gain a benefit for sponsors, participants, and ultimately also sites. So a virtual visit is made up of kind of two components. So telehealth, obviously becoming more and more popular, is really the mechanism of communication between the two parties. Telehealth is not the visit. It is the way that they communicate, and it allows participants and sites to connect and keep that kind of personal communication dialogue going on. That face-to-face interaction is absolutely critical. So you combine the telehealth capability, the communication capability, with all of your data gathering tools. And so on the left, you have your site team experience, where the visit is conducted via telehealth, but you're able to capture data via an eSource, EDC, eCOA, ClinRow, whatever tool you want to do to capture that data and capture that source. And on the right, typically, the participant experience is done through a mobile phone. And typically it's agnostic, whether it's iOS or Android. And that visit is conducted via the phone, and the phone also becomes the mechanism for collecting all of the data. And so whether, again, it's a e-consent, a survey, sensors, eCOA, ePro, all of that is gathered through the phone and ultimately all synced into one central study database, which makes it very simple for data managers to collect that data and do their management exercises. And this is how it actually works. So really, step one, the participant, and actually let me take a step back. One of the most important learnings that we've had is that you need a very robust scheduling engine to be able to manage virtual visits. You're dealing with all the same challenges that one might have with dealing with in-office and in-clinic visits, but it has to be through a smart mechanism and done through the phone. And so your scheduling engine has to be smart enough to be able to deal with rescheduling and completion windows and when should we start scheduling and the schedule of the PI and their staff, the variances around that. And so having a smart scheduling engine is a paramount and a critical finding that we've had when dealing with decentralized clinical trials. So the site will log in, and typically it's done through any device. The site interface is typically done through a web browser, and they can log in and they can initiate a virtual visit. The participant would then get a notification on their phone, and also depending on the kind of clinical your protocol or whichever version of decentralized clinical trial you're going to work on, you would either have a BYOD mechanism where you're using actually your own device, or you would have a provisioned device that was sent to you by the study team. And depending on which one of those devices, you would accept the call with one click, and then you're instantly starting to talk. And one of the things that we've noticed, and we've done quite a few studies with this and been behind the glass to watch actual participants and actual PIs interact with the technology as a whole. And 100% of them have been able to figure out the technology and answer and respond to calls, and also have really enjoyed the experience. And there was no degradation in the experience by doing it virtually through video and through these remote data capture opportunities as opposed to in-clinic visits. And so just to kind of tag on to that, what we've noticed in this, during this pandemic, a couple of things that have happened. One is the industry itself has shifted, and prior to the pandemic, we spent a lot of time educating and a lot of time answering questions like, why should we have a DCT strategy? And it has quickly shifted to how do we execute on our DCT strategy? And so it's no longer an if or a why, it's a when and how. And that's been one massive shift. And I don't know that that's going to go back. And so, there's lots of discussions going on in the industry right now about how to continue with traditional clinical trials and what kind of digital component can be added to them. The other thing that we've noticed is that participants and every human on the planet is now more used to dealing and engaging in remote conversations. Zoom is now a part of the lexicon that everyone's comfortable using. And so before, there may have been barriers that said, hey, participants aren't going to use this. There are certain demographics that aren't going to be comfortable doing remote. Well, that paradigm has shifted very, very quickly as well. And so what we're finding is in this world that the paradigm of the participant and the site also being willing to do remote visits has shifted, and sites are absolutely looking to prepare to provide care remotely. And so they're in effect getting the tools and the training they need to do virtual visits. So we also recognize there are two kind of opportunities to apply virtual visits. So with the pandemic, there were many active clinical trials that were put at risk or in jeopardy of being able to do the data collection that they needed to do. And so what we found was that you could add a few elements of a virtual visit to an existing active clinical trial, and that would then minimize the risk of being able to capture that data. So for example, you could add e-consent, and if you went BYOD, you instantly were able to send that to a participant on their existing phones. You could do on-demand telehealth so that you didn't have to do any scheduling. You could just do a unscheduled virtual visit. You could add flexible scheduling that can be done via visits to be done via telehealth, also home health and or on-site. And then source document collection could also be done remotely. And some of the on-site assessments move to technology-enabled activities. And you kind of put some of those things together, and you are able to apply that to an active clinical trial in order to, again, minimize the risk of losing important data, and also increase or improve participant safety. Just simply because you have all these tools and you're still able to monitor that participant's progress in the study. So if there's an upcoming clinical trial, one that is new and still in the planning phases, there are some steps that you can take to consider adding virtual visits more organically. And so ultimately it starts with reviewing the protocol and schedule of events and ICFs, and make sure that there's opportunity in there for virtual visits. You'll find with upcoming clinical trials, it's really all about flexibility for the participant and flexibility for the sites. And so this really adheres to the whole concept of participant centricity, and how we want to make sure that we are listening to and paying attention to how they want to interact with us as we're providing those studies. So the other things to review when it comes to considering virtual visits within your upcoming protocols are what physical exams and vital sensors are needed, and sometimes those can be done remotely and or through home health. Some of the visits, you can give them a flex option where they can choose whether they want to do it remote or on-site or with home health. Many activities can be switched on to become protocol standards, and that includes eCOA, ePro, surveys, reminders, and sensors. There's a whole list of all these activities, and I'm going to kind of dive deep into that here in a minute. And then ultimately, the list of assessments that cannot be completed remotely. And that will drive what in-clinic visits you actually have to have. And so we've seen in our experience, many protocols will come in and there'll be 10 in-clinic visits at the beginning, and by the time we're done, they're down to 2 in-clinic, one at the beginning, one at the end, and everything else can be done remotely. But sometimes we're only able to replace 1 or 2 of those, and that just comes down to the assessments. But even replacing 1 or 2 significantly reduces the burden on participants and has value to the sites and the sponsor as well. So this next slide is an example schedule of events. The first column is a list of the kind of assessments that we could that are typical when it comes to putting together a clinical trial. The second column is the kind of data capture technology that would be used, and then the next 2 columns is all about capturing the data. So the first column is who contributes the data, and I put in here 2 different study types on that spectrum that I talked about earlier. There's a light decentralized, and then there's more of an expanded decentralized. And then the last column there is where is the data captured. And this gives you a really solid idea of, if we just focus, say, on the light decentralized columns, how we would do informed consent. So in a light decentralized, we would still do it on site and patient, and it'll be done in paper. But in an expanded decentralized, you can do site and patient remote and or on site. Okay, so the key of this chart is being able to really have the flexibility to decide how you want, where in that spectrum you want to be in order to collect the data, in order to ensure data integrity and also ultimately safety of the participant. Let's look at a few more here. Anything that is participant reported is the first kind of low-hanging fruit that you're going to want to grab and make remote. So, for example, your kind of your patient-reported outcomes and anything that would be potentially e-consent, and then any kind of sensor that they could that would be able to be applied remotely. and also e-diaries. So these are all kind of the patient self-reported opportunities. And then as you expand that into, filling up more, filling up and or growing on that spectrum, you can continue to add some of these other items, again, through whether it's home health or raters or through leveraging technology. You can really grow and scale your, what you want to have virtual and what you want to continue having on site and in the clinic. So one of the things, again, this is to kind of walk you through the path of making a decision on what protocol to use and whether this is right for your study or not. We've kind of put together a fit score. And this is kind of what we found from a therapeutic area and a study phase design to be most appropriate for virtual visits. And as you can see here, some of these therapeutic areas really lend themselves well to virtual visits. I mean, respiratory, dermatology, ophthalmology, rare diseases, these have all been in our fit score, have all rated really high. And just to kind of give you an idea of some of those criteria, it's like complexity of schedule of events, administration of drug, patient population, and then validation of the specific assessments included in the study. So whether they require on-site or in-person effort. And so that's kind of how we scored out the therapeutic areas. You also have on the right there kind of your study and your study phase and design. So, we're not seeing very many phase 1s, but phase 1Bs, 2s, and 3s all are participating in the hybrid. A lot of the registries, phase 4s, phase 3Bs are also participating in the fully decentralized study model. So this is just a quick look at how we recommend and how different therapeutic areas and phases are rated based on kind of what we've seen and the success around and the challenges that we've seen around the studies that we've performed. My next two slides, I'm going to walk through benefits and challenges. And so, as you can imagine, many of the benefits are probably fairly well understood. And so I'll kind of highlight a few of these, but I'd like to spend some time on the actual challenges. So kind of from a sponsor CRO, there are always opportunities for things like reduced cost, but I wouldn't do virtual just walking in hoping to reduce my cost. I mean, that is going to be something that will likely happen, but it shouldn't be the driver for this. Continuous data collection, and then ultimately the safety of the participant, potentially more frequent safety reviews. And so the sponsor CRO has better oversight over the study and is connected immediately to much of the data that is collected in relative real time. For the participants, the benefits are well stated. It is reducing travel time and time on site and administrative time. It is just significantly less of a time burden for them to participate in virtual visits. Also, their location no longer becomes a barrier. Some participants have to travel an hour or more to get to their site. They're able to participate remotely, and then also those in more of a rural area are able to participate. You also have having real estate on their most important device that drives their life is that smartphone. Being able to have reminders and being able for them to have engagement, content, and opportunities to keep the study top of mind by daily providing or providing regular updates and providing regular notifications on the activities that they have to complete. And also really quick connection to help desk and support. From a site, what we found is that they really appreciate the continuous view of patient data. At any given time, they can log in and view relatively real-time data and have oversight over that. They're able to also identify at-risk patients in between visits. So they're able to get, as they collect data in between the visits, they're able to look for safety alerts and be able to make decisions and ultimately provide a safer experience for the participant. It reduces burden, and ultimately the connection between the site and home health services is really powerful. It allows a continuity of of the study that has been, not tapped into as fully as it should be. So those are some of the high level benefits. What I'd like to do is cover some of the challenges, and these are challenges that we've run into across all of our studies. We work really aggressively to mitigate some of these challenges, and I'll share some of those mitigation strategies with you. But these are things to be considering as you put together and think about putting together your virtual study. So from a sponsor CRO standpoint, any kind of regulatory authority or agency discussions we recommend starting those early and often, and get them in front of that. If it's going to be a DCT study, letting them know that ahead of time, walking them through the approach, and we've even gone as far as to mail out devices to the RA to be able to review and understand exactly what the participant experience is going to be. The other thing is to have a backup plan for your tech. So as much as we rely on and as it is important for collecting this data, you should always have a backup plan to be able to collect data in the event that there's some sort of technical failure. And there's so many kind of points of failure opportunities between their internet connection and the servers and the device that you just have to think ahead. And as long as you plan and think ahead, then you'll be prepared for anything that happens. And then the other thing for sponsors and CROs is a lot of times it requires additional SOPs to be created. And so we found that a lot of times if we're able to kind of help and guide the creation of those SOPs just to ensure that all the processes are put in place to be able to handle virtual visits internally. Don't underestimate the lift on that internally to be able to support these. For a participant, there are a couple of things I'll point out here. One is the less face-to-face in-person interaction. Some people really, really need and require that, but it's something that you have to at least plan for and account for. Sometimes this is more complex than what they're used to, and some of our participants have just said, hey, I just want to go into the site. And as long as you have flexibility and some options for them, then there's that opportunity. And then for sites, really it comes down to training, and then more training, right? So there's a learning curve from a tech standpoint. There's a learning curve from the process standpoint, how to review the data. It's a lot more data than they're probably used to. It's a lot different process on how to collect and manage and query and edit the data. And so really it comes down to your training program and how you're going to train that site to be able to kind of close that adoption curve. The next slide here is just kind of I put together a high-level list of virtual visit best practices. And so I'll kind of walk through some of the important ones here. I want to leave some time at the end for a few questions if there are any. So I'll kind of go through this quickly. But number one is really, you need to have a device strategy. And whether it's BYOD or provisioned, and what we find is most popular these days is a hybrid approach, which is BYOD, but you provision the gap. So if you have participants that don't necessarily want to use their smartphone or don't have a compatible enough smartphone or whatever the other burden or barriers are, your sites have the ability to quickly get them a device and keep those replenished. So that's definitely an approach. The next thing is another learning. As soon as you're doing a global study, you need to have 24/7 multilingual help desk. And this is more of a help desk it's a technology help desk, really. It's not to support necessarily the study or the operations of the study. It is really to help participants and sites be able to use the tech and be able to, if they run into any errors or issues, they're able to remediate them quickly. The next one I'll jump to is home health training. We found that when pairing a home health company up with with PIs and sites, it's very helpful to align them personally. So if you have investigator meetings, whether they're virtual or on site, whatever it may be, you should have your home health nurses pair up with those PIs to get to know them, how they work, what their operations are, long before that study is, and have them get to know each other in a very personal way, so that as they're working and providing and operating the study, they'll know how to work together with that. Uh, Virtual visits are accepted globally, but as you go into each country, every country has its own kind of unique um, purview into what is acceptable, whether e-consent is acceptable or you need a wet signature, or if if telemedicine or telehealth is considered an appropriate visit. These are all things that need to be considered. And as you're working to go global with your DCT company, there are always use them as advisors to be able to kind of walk you through that. But your organization will ultimately need to have that kind of information, those kinds of insights to confirm and work against. And then the last one I'll touch here is you got to account for cultural relevance. And so in our global studies, the concept of localization, and especially in these studies, is a critical element. And so being able to provide the proper content, context, and training is critical when doing these global studies. Especially remember that you're not going to have as much site interaction and oversight at the point of collecting data. So my last slide that I have is just a really high-level look at a hybrid decentralized case study. The 2 points I'll point out, this is a phase 3B for a top 10 biopharma, less than 100 participants, and this is in the dermatology space. The two high-level statistics or data points I want to pull out is this 4% for thread DTP support. So we found that out of all tickets, conversations, calls, emails, only 4% of them had to do with technical support. The other 96% were operational type questions. And so what does that tell you? It's, hey, we should always consider that when you have a tech help desk that we need to be able to connect them directly with the operations and those who can answer those operational calls. The other data point I'll point out here is 99% compliant. We had a central site for this particular one, and they were 99% compliant with all of their visits and efforts and all of the required virtual visits. And so, as you can see here, when performed and executed appropriately, then you're able to get some very successful numbers and metrics when it comes to a decentralized study. And so just kind of in closing, I hope you learned a little bit about a virtual visit and how it works, some options on how to decide whether a virtual visit is right for your study. And ultimately, I hope you were able to take away a best practice or an insight throughout this presentation. And now I'll go ahead and open it up for, I got a few minutes left for questions if anyone has any.
Wonderful. We have two questions. The first one's more of a comment for you. And Manuel is saying a key issue is whether there are practical limits to the decentralization of trial activities under a single investigator's supervision. So I'm not sure if that was a question or a comment for Sean, but take it as you will. And
yeah, sure. So Manuel, I would say that for sure there are definitely practical limits to what they're able to do and provide, especially around volume. I would say that we haven't necessarily, in our experience, run into that as a barrier or a wall to doing this, but it is definitely something to consider.
Wonderful. And another question from an attendee is, I had a difficult time finding a service provider for home visits to collect blood draws and other biosamples. And of those found, the cost was enormous compared with on-site visits, swamping cost savings from other measures. Any suggestions or thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't know that you really make up the cost around scale, right? So it really depends on the size of the study that you're doing and also the kind of the location. And so I can imagine there are some global studies that the home health nurse solution is not necessarily a financial benefit. And as I mentioned earlier, you shouldn't necessarily go into the virtual visit space to save money. It's not necessarily always going to impact your bottom line, but what it is going to do is make it a better experience for your participant and your sites and ultimately yourself. So I don't know. There are lots of, we typically work with the big home health agencies, and I don't have a lot of visibility into their costs, but I can imagine that there could be a burden there. So.
Wonderful. And as mentioned, Sean and his team are available to connect via our meeting scheduler link. He has shared with me his contact details and email address. So if you are interested in connecting and learning more about threads research, do let myself, Sherry, Victor, the rest of my team know. So once again, thank you so much, Sean, for your presentation.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, everybody.